What if the past isn't what we think it is? What if beneath layers of soil and time lie pieces of knowledge that never made it into our textbooks, not because they were disproven, but because they didn't fit the story we wanted to tell? In 1936, just outside Baghdad, a clay jar was pulled from the earth. It was ordinary at first glance, about 5 inches tall, sealed with pitch. But inside it was a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and traces of acidic residue. When filled with grape juice, a replica of the jar produced a small but unmistakable electric current. For years it was quietly labeled the Baghdad Battery. If true, it meant someone had built a functioning electrical device nearly 2 millennia before electricity was supposed to have been discovered. It wasn't an isolated case. Near the same region, similar jars surfaced. All shared the same structure. Yet despite physical evidence, despite experiments that replicated their functionality, the prevailing explanation insisted they were scroll containers, scrolls placed inside metal cylinders, sealed, with no way to retrieve them. When war broke out in 2003, many of these artifacts disappeared. Some were looted, some simply vanished. The best preserved examples, those that might have confirmed or denied the battery theory, are gone. Mainstream archaeologists often call these objects out-of-place artifacts, items that don't belong in the time they're found. But what if the timeline itself is what's misplaced? What if human knowledge hasn't been a smooth curve upward, but a series of forgotten plateaus? Think about this. Ancient texts describe lamps in temple sanctuaries that glowed without flame. Metal objects from the same era show signs of electroplating, a process that requires current. What if these weren't legends or lucky guesses, but glimpses of something we lost? The deeper question isn't whether the battery was real, it's why we're so reluctant to accept that it might be. We live in a culture that worships progress as a straight line. Our version of history is a staircase, each generation smarter, each discovery building neatly atop the last. But reality is rarely that orderly. Wars destroy libraries. Empires crumble. Languages vanish. Knowledge doesn't just evolve, it disappears. The Baghdad Battery isn't threatening because it's mysterious. It's threatening because it reminds us how much we've forgotten. It suggests that science, like history, is vulnerable to assumption. And if electricity existed 2,000 years ago, even in its simplest form, then maybe our ancestors weren't groping in darkness after all. Maybe we are the ones still learning how to see. What if history isn't a ladder, but a loop? Picture a block of solid granite, dense and unyielding. Now imagine drilling a perfect, cylindrical hole through it, smooth, evenly spiraled, flawlessly round. That's exactly what archaeologists have found in the ruins of ancient Egypt. In a place where copper tools were thought to be the height of technology, some granite cores show spiral grooves consistent with high-speed rotary drilling. These are not crude bores or irregular hand-cut marks. Engineers who've studied them say the feed rate, how quickly the drill advanced, would be difficult even for modern tools. One such core reveals a groove depth and pitch that suggest a drill moved through the granite at nearly 1 inch per revolution. To put that in perspective, even today's equipment would struggle with that precision on such a hard material. Granite, with a hardness of 6 to 7 on the Mohs scale, laughs at copper and bronze tools, which max out around 3 or 4. Attempts to replicate the holes using copper tools with sand as an abrasive have failed. Modern tests using the best replicated ancient methods achieve only a fraction of the efficiency, leaving behind inconsistent grooves and wider, irregular holes. Yet the ancient cores remain consistent. No signs of wobble, no variation in depth or diameter. Even more curious, the spiral grooves don't vary when moving through different minerals in the stone. Feldspar and quartz, which have different hardnesses, are cut equally deep, something hand tools simply don't do. The pattern resembles the work of diamond-tipped drills, not Bronze Age implements. How were these holes made? Who had access to the kind of stability, speed, and cutting power needed to do this? The standard answer that it was achieved through patience and sand isn't just unsatisfying. It contradicts the evidence. What if we're looking at the remnants of a technology that slipped through history's fingers? Modern stoneworkers admit they'd struggle to match the precision found in ancient Egyptian cores, even with today's power tools. That admission alone should give us pause. Are we projecting simplicity onto the past because we can't imagine otherwise? The idea of advanced ancient machinery challenges our assumptions about linear progress. It suggests that what we think of as modern isn't unique. It's a rediscovery. And if a civilization once mastered the secrets of precision engineering only for that knowledge to vanish, what else might we have lost? How do we measure civilization, not by its survivors, but by the tools it left behind? In the heart of South Africa, deep within ancient rock formations untouched for billions of years, miners stumbled upon something that shouldn't exist: small metallic spheres with an eerie perfection. These objects, some only an inch in diameter, are smooth, round, and etched with precise parallel grooves that encircle their equators. They were pulled from rock layers dated to 2.8 billion years ago, long before humans, mammals, or even complex multicellular life walked the Earth. The spheres are made from a nickel-steel alloy. Not only is this combination foreign to the natural geological environment where they were found, but it's also something that doesn't form without smelting. A technological process that, according to the timeline, hadn't even been conceived when the rock was formed. They weren't sitting on the surface. These objects were embedded deep within solid rock, often dozens of feet underground, locked in place by time. Their consistent size and shape are unlike the randomness we associate with natural formations. Nature may favor chaos, but these spheres suggest intentional manufacture. Geologists have struggled to explain them. Some say they might be the result of natural mineral growth, but no known process produces grooves with such uniformity, spacing, and precision. Others call them geologic curiosities, without providing a plausible mechanism. Museums display them behind glass. Labels use cautious language: anomaly, unusual formation. But no one seems eager to confront the central question: how did engineered objects end up inside billion-year-old rock? If these spheres are what they appear to be, manufactured items, then they rewrite the entire narrative of Earth's technological history. They suggest not just a pre-human civilization, but one advanced enough to create high-grade alloys and shape them with industrial precision. It's a thought too big for many to hold. So the spheres are often dismissed not because we understand them, but because we don't. We like our stories clean. We like the idea that history is ours to define, that humanity is the pinnacle, the only architects of progress. But these small, silent spheres whisper otherwise. What if Earth has been home to more than one kind of intelligence? What if we aren't the first species to look up and wonder? And how many more ancient questions lie buried, simply because we're not yet ready to hear the answers? The Aegean Sea hides secrets, and one of them lay dormant for centuries in the rusted remains of a Roman-era shipwreck. Discovered in 1901 off the coast of Antikythera, Greece, a corroded bronze object sat quietly in a museum for decades. It wasn't until the 1950s, when someone peered inside with X-rays, that the truth emerged. Beneath the crust of time was a machine, gears, axles, and teeth, intricately arranged with mathematical precision. Over 30 bronze cogs interlocked in complex patterns, revealing a design that should not have existed in the ancient world. The Antikythera mechanism is, in essence, a computer. Turn a crank, and the device calculates the positions of the sun, moon, planets. It predicts eclipses. It marks the cycles of the Olympic Games. It even accounts for the irregular orbit of the moon using a differential gear, something we believed wasn't invented until the Renaissance. Its craftsmanship is extraordinary. The gears are small, some with teeth finer than a fingernail, cut so precisely they can only be seen clearly with magnification. The ratios between gears align with known astronomical cycles, proving that its creators understood complex celestial mathematics. And yet, this machine dates to around 60 BCE. No other artifact like it has ever been found, not because they didn't exist, perhaps, but because they didn't survive. Bronze was often melted down, repurposed for war or trade. What if this was just the one that happened to sink? The existence of the Antikythera mechanism forces us to reconsider ancient Greek technology. Texts from the period speak of automata, self-moving machines used in temples and theaters. They may have been more than myth or metaphor. When modern engineers attempt to recreate the mechanism using only ancient tools, they quickly realize the difficulty. The precision is daunting. To achieve it, the maker would need not only theoretical knowledge, but also advanced tools for cutting and shaping metal. The machine defies the narrative of slow, gradual development. It is a leap. A reminder that intellectual brilliance doesn't belong to one age. We think of history as additive, but sometimes it loses as much as it gains. Technology, like memory, can be forgotten. And if a device this advanced existed in the ancient world, what else was lost to corrosion, fire, or time? Are we rediscovering what someone else already knew? In 1929, tucked inside a dusty library in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, a scholar unrolled a map that shouldn't have existed. Drawn on gazelle skin by Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis, the map was dated to 1513. At first glance, it showed the familiar outlines of Europe, Africa, and South America. But then came the anomaly. The bottom of the map revealed a landmass strikingly similar to Antarctica. Not the Antarctica we know today, buried under miles of ice, but one that appeared ice-free, with mountain ranges and river systems visible. These features wouldn't be confirmed by modern seismic surveys until the 1950s. Piri Reis himself claimed he hadn't created the geography from scratch. He had compiled it using ancient source maps, some, he wrote, dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. He mentioned using about 20 charts, many of them long lost. What he created was a mosaic of forgotten knowledge. Cartographers were stunned. When the U.S. Air Force analyzed the map, they confirmed that the southern continent matched the subglacial coastline of Queen Maud Land. Accuracy no 16th century explorer should have achieved. Moreover, the map employed an advanced projection technique, an azimuthal equidistant projection centered near Cairo that required spherical trigonometry. It was a projection method unknown in Europe at the time. How could anyone in the early 1500s, let alone in ancient times, chart a frozen continent that wouldn't be officially discovered until 1820, and wouldn't be mapped beneath the ice until the age of satellites? Some say it was coincidence. A lucky guess. But luck doesn't explain the correct depiction of bays, inlets, and coastal ranges invisible to the naked eye. If the Piri Reis map is accurate, it implies that a seafaring culture existed thousands of years before the known age of exploration, one capable of detailed surveys, long-distance navigation, and sophisticated cartography. Mainstream historians are skeptical. They argue that interpreting ancient maps with modern overlays is misleading, but the alignment is too precise to dismiss outright. The mystery lies not in the map itself, but in the minds that created its sources. Who were they? How did they see what no one else could? Perhaps history isn't missing pieces. Perhaps we've just stopped asking the kinds of questions that reveal them. And if memory can be lost in parchment and time, what else have we forgotten to remember? Step into a stone chamber deep within ancient ruins. Say a word aloud. The air changes. The sound swells, not chaotically, but with eerie precision. Certain tones are amplified, others vanish entirely. What you hear isn't an echo. It's resonance. Engineered resonance. Archaeologists once thought these small rooms, carved from rock or built from perfectly fitted stones, were simple tombs or meditation spaces. But modern acoustic testing tells a different story. In one limestone chamber, a researcher played a tone at exactly 110 Hz. The room responded with force. The walls trembled subtly. People standing inside reported sensations beyond sound, vibrations in their chest, shifts in perception. EEG scans later revealed increased activity in brain regions tied to emotion and altered states. This wasn't accidental. The chamber amplified that specific frequency while muting others. Creating such an effect requires careful calibration and understanding of wave behavior, reflection, and materials. Modern concert halls use similar techniques. So do anechoic chambers and sound studios. But these ancient spaces were built thousands of years before wave physics had a name. Other chambers display different acoustic phenomena. Some carry a whisper from one end to the other without loss. Some cancel echoes completely. Some selectively amplify male voices while dampening female tones, or vice versa. Each design shows mastery of sonic manipulation. Walls are smoothed to near perfection. Angles are cut with astonishing precision. Dimensions follow ratios that match harmonic intervals in music. These weren't artistic flourishes, they were blueprints for sound. Attempts to replicate the acoustic qualities using only primitive tools have largely failed. Even with modern simulations, engineers struggle to achieve the same effects without the benefit of centuries of acoustic theory. So how did ancient builders do it? Trial and error over generations? Oral tradition passed down among stonemasons? Or did they understand something, mathematically or intuitively, that we've only recently begun to explore? We often assume that ancient architecture was driven by ritual or symbolism alone. But these chambers suggest a different motive, a functional purpose rooted in sensory experience. What if sound wasn't just decoration, but a tool, a gateway, a kind of technology in itself? The stones still sing. And if we listen closely, they might be trying to tell us something we've long forgotten. Beneath layers of dust and time, buried in ancient tombs and temples, lie objects made not of gold or stone, but of crystal. Quartz, to be exact, carved, shaped, and polished to a degree of precision that challenges even modern artisans. These aren't crude amulets or decorative trinkets. They are optical lenses, perfect spheres, and geometrically precise objects with tolerances measured in microns. Some have internal features, channels and cavities, that seem impossible to create without advanced tools. Quartz has a hardness of 7 on the Mohs scale. It's tougher than any metal available to ancient civilizations. Modern gem cutters use diamond-tipped instruments, high-speed rotary tools, and precision lathes. Yet many of these ancient crystal artifacts show no tool marks, no striations, no signs of grinding or polishing by hand. One researcher found evidence of rotary cutting, clean circular grooves of consistent width. These cuts are so exact that they suggest the use of stable, high-speed machinery. Others have documented crystal spheres so perfectly round their deviation from a true sphere is less than modern manufacturing standards. Try to recreate this with hand tools and abrasives, and you'll get scratches, irregularities. A surface that may shine, but under magnification, tells a very different story. The ancient artifacts, however, are clean, optically pure. Some function like lenses. When tested, they focus light precisely, with curvature matching known optical formulas. They're not decorative curiosities. They are components of something, tools, instruments, or perhaps objects with purposes we no longer understand. Mainstream archaeology often credits patience and craftsmanship. Certainly the ancients were skilled, but skill alone doesn't account for the absence of marks, the internal machining, or the mathematical perfection. To dismiss these pieces as merely ornamental is to ignore what they demonstrate, a grasp of materials, science, geometry, and optics far beyond their supposed era. What if these artifacts weren't exceptions, but examples of a broader, lost tradition? A legacy of technology we haven't recognized because we expected to find it in metal, not in stone. Crystal doesn't corrode. It survives where other materials fail. Perhaps that's why these remnants endure, silent, clear, and precise. And perhaps it's time we began to see them not just as relics of art, but as messages carved in light. Along the coastlines of the ancient Roman world, harbors built more than 2,000 years ago still stand, weathered but intact. Waves have battered them for centuries. Salt and time have done their worst, yet they endure. Their secret? A forgotten science hidden in the concrete beneath the sea. Unlike modern concrete, which crumbles within decades in marine environments, Roman concrete grows stronger with age. When scientists studied the submerged structures, they found something astonishing. The material was alive, in a way. It reacted with seawater to create new crystals, filling cracks and reinforcing itself over time. The mix wasn't random. Romans used volcanic ash from specific sources, combined with lime and seawater. The result was a chemical reaction that created tobermorite and other durable minerals. These compounds not only bound the material, but enhanced it, something modern concrete cannot do without additives and controlled environments. Microscopic analysis revealed more. The crystals didn't just patch weak spots. They interlocked the structure, preventing erosion and fatigue. Some modern researchers have tried to replicate this effect, but few have succeeded. Even with today's tools, we struggle to match what Roman builders achieved with hand-mixed formulas and empirical wisdom. The Romans may not have known the chemistry, but they knew the outcome. They chose specific materials, adjusted proportions, and observed results over generations. Their knowledge was practical and powerful. The irony? Roman concrete also had a lower carbon footprint than the Portland cement we use today. It required less heat to produce, making it more sustainable, stronger, greener, lost. When the Roman Empire fell, the knowledge faded. For over 1,000 years, no one built anything quite like it again. Cathedrals, castles, city walls, all eventually cracked and crumbled. The secret had vanished. It wasn't until recent years, through scanning electron microscopes and chemical modeling, that we began to uncover what the Romans knew. But even now, the full recipe remains elusive. What else have we overlooked, not because it failed, but because we forgot how to make it? The ruins that surround us aren't just monuments to power. They're echoes of ingenuity. And in their survival, they offer a quiet challenge. Can we learn from the past without needing to relive its loss? High in the jungles of Colombia and Peru, golden figurines have been uncovered in burial sites. Small, winged objects no more than a few inches long. At first glance, they were dismissed as stylized animals. Birds, perhaps. Insects. Artistic flourishes from pre-Columbian cultures. But engineers saw something else. The forms were aerodynamic. The wings were positioned not like those of birds, but like aircraft, centered for balance, angled upward for stability. The tails weren't feathers or fins. They were vertical stabilizers, just like those on modern jets. Curious, a group of aviation experts scaled the models up. They followed the proportions exactly. When placed in wind tunnels, the models exhibited stable flight behavior. With minor adjustments, like adding propulsion, they flew, straight, steady, controlled. Coincidence? Critics argue the resemblance to airplanes is imagined, that we're projecting our technology onto ancient art, but the details are hard to ignore. Wing geometry, dihedral angles, proportions consistent with aerodynamic theory. None of these are decorative choices. They're functional. And if the ancient artists were depicting birds, they chose strange features. No bird has forward-swept wings and vertical tail fins. No insect glides with such stability. These figures obey the principles of aeronautics, not biology. The civilizations that made them possibly the Tolima, left no written manuals or blueprints. What remains are myths, stories of sky gods, flying beings, and metal craft that roamed the heavens. Are these legends or echoes? Mainstream archaeology remains cautious. The figures are labeled as zoomorphic, animal-shaped, and speculation is discouraged. Yet the successful flight tests of the models suggest the ancients understood more than we credit them for. Perhaps they witnessed something, perhaps they remembered, or perhaps their imaginations were informed by realities we no longer see. Gold doesn't rust. These artifacts have survived the centuries not just in material, but in meaning. And the real mystery may not be how they were made, but what memory they carry in their shape. What if these tiny wings once pointed toward a forgotten sky? In 1972, inside a uranium mine in Oklo, Gabon, scientists stumbled upon something that defied everything they knew about physics. The ore being analyzed showed signs of nuclear fission, natural fission, something that should have been impossible. At first, they suspected a processing error. But as the investigation deepened, the implications grew stranger. The uranium was depleted in a way that mirrored fuel used in modern nuclear reactors. Isotope ratios were off. Traces of reaction byproducts lingered in telltale patterns. Geologists found that the uranium deposits had once sustained self-regulating nuclear chain reactions, not for minutes or days, but for hundreds of thousands of years. These were natural reactors, embedded in the Earth 2 billion years ago. But then came the more unsettling detail, the geometry. The arrangement of uranium, water pathways, and surrounding materials was optimal for maintaining a controlled reaction. Layers of clay acted as containment. Neutron-absorbing minerals surrounded the core. The cycles of heating and cooling mirrored modern safety protocols. Reactions would begin, heat would rise, water would evaporate. The reaction would pause, then restart as the rock cooled and water returned. It was, in essence, a reactor with passive safety features. Nuclear engineers marveled at the configurations. The balance between fuel, moderator, and neutron absorbers was too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. Some began to ask a forbidden question. Could this have been more than a natural accident? The suggestion that an ancient intelligence might have understood fission long before humanity split the atom in the 20th century was ridiculed, but the data remained. The patterns didn't change. Mainstream science holds that these were purely geological phenomena. And yet, the improbability of nature assembling such a finely tuned system continues to gnaw at those who study it. If the Oklo reactors were entirely natural, they are astonishing miracles of chance. If they weren't, if they were in some way influenced or initiated, then they point to a lost understanding of physics deeper than we dare imagine. Either way, they stand as a reminder, even the most advanced science may not be new. And sometimes, the Earth itself holds memories of fire we thought we lit first. They call them impossible artifacts. Not because they don't exist, but because they shouldn't. Objects that sit quietly in museums or are hidden in private collections, real, measurable, and deeply inconvenient. A clay jar that generates electricity. Drill holes in granite that rival modern machining. Gears from an ancient sea wreck that calculate eclipses. Maps that chart Antarctica before its discovery. Spheres embedded in billion-year-old rock. Golden figurines that fly. Concrete that heals. Crystals cut to optical perfection. And a nuclear reactor from a time when Earth was still forming continents. Each of these on its own could be written off, a curiosity, an anomaly. But taken together, they sketch the outline of a story we're not ready to tell. Mainstream institutions acknowledge these items, but often with a shrug. The artifacts are real, yes, but their meaning is minimized. The Baghdad battery becomes a scroll jar. The Antikythera mechanism, a fluke. The Piri Reis map, a lucky guess. When evidence contradicts the timeline stays and the evidence is explained away. The process follows a pattern. First, denial, then dismissal, finally, silence. But silence isn't explanation, it's avoidance. And at the heart of that avoidance lies a discomfort, a recognition that human history may be far more complex, interrupted, and cyclical than we've been taught to believe. That knowledge isn't always passed down, but sometimes lost and rediscovered. That progress isn't a line, it's a spiral. The question isn't whether these artifacts are real. They are. The question is what we're willing to accept about our own past. What if our ancestors weren't primitive beings inching toward enlightenment, but inheritors of a legacy we barely understand? What if the story of civilization is not one of ascent, but of return? It's easier to forget, to focus on what fits, to leave the rest in the basement of the museum. But these objects persist, quiet, solid, wrong in all the right ways. And in their presence, they ask us not just to rewrite history, but to reimagine it. Throughout history, loss has always been the silent companion of discovery. For every invention remembered, how many have vanished? For every idea recorded, how many were buried beneath war, fire, or forgetting? Take Roman concrete. For centuries after the empire's fall, European builders could no longer replicate its strength. Temples stood while castles crumbled. Knowledge wasn't passed. It was scattered, fragmented, and forgotten, or the Antikythera mechanism. It wasn't rediscovered through ancient texts, but by accident, lying beneath the sea, encased in coral. Without modern imaging, it would still be dismissed as a lump of corroded metal. How many other machines were melted down or lost to rust? The Baghdad battery may have produced light, but its wires are gone. The crystal lenses may have focused stars, but we no longer know their purpose. The maps may have been copied, but the original surveyors are silent. The ancient drill cores remain, but the tools that made them have vanished. These aren't mysteries born of fantasy. They are real artifacts with measurable properties. What's missing isn't evidence, but our willingness to consider what that evidence means. We imagine history as a slow climb, fire, then wheel, then steam. But the timeline may be more like a tide, knowledge flowing in, retreating, then surging again. Civilizations rise not just in power, but in insight. And when they fall, they don't just lose land, they lose understanding. It's tempting to treat the past as settled, but the more we look, the more we see that history is full of blind spots, empty pages, echoes. What if we've misjudged ancient minds, not because they lack knowledge, but because we lack the context to recognize it? Not everything can be measured in years. Some truths are old, not because they've endured, but because they were forgotten too soon. And every time we dismiss an impossible object, we risk repeating that mistake, not just by losing history, but by refusing to see it when it's already in our hands. Imagine this. A future civilization unearths a smartphone but lacks electricity. They marvel at its smooth surface, the etched patterns, the dark glass. They assume it's a decorative item, maybe a ceremonial tool. Its true purpose is lost. Not because it's unknowable, but because the knowledge required to recognize it is gone. Now, reverse the roles. We're the archaeologists, and scattered across deserts, beneath oceans, deep in mines, we're finding objects just as baffling. The temptation is to explain them away, call them coincidences, or outliers, or myths, because to accept them would mean rewriting what we think we know, not just about history, but about ourselves. The golden aircraft figurines, the precision-cut crystal spheres, the billion-year-old metallic grooves, the gears of a long-dead machine. Each item is a doorway, but to walk through, we'd have to admit that the past may have rivaled the present in complexity, maybe even surpassed it. What if memory isn't something we inherit, but something we reconstruct? Piece by piece, layer by layer, artifact by artifact. And maybe that's the point. Maybe these objects aren't just remnants. Maybe they're reminders. Clues left behind by cultures that understood what we've only just begun to rediscover, not just in technology, but in perspective. Because the real lesson isn't that ancient people might have had machines, it's that knowledge isn't linear, progress isn't guaranteed, and wisdom isn't always preserved. In a world obsessed with innovation, these artifacts whisper something older, that forgetting is easier than we think. And remembering takes more than just discovery. It takes imagination, humility, and the courage to say, I don't know. To admit that some questions aren't meant to be answered quickly. Some are meant to be lived with, turned over like stones in the hand, until one day they make sense again. We began with a question. What if history isn't what we've been told? 14 chapters later, the answer remains open, not because it's uncertain, but because it refuses to be simple. The artifacts are real. The mysteries are tangible. The evidence exists not in shadows or speculation, but in stone, metal, crystal, and clay. Each object tells a story out of sync with the timeline we've constructed, not to deceive us, but to remind us that the past is larger than our narratives. There was a battery in a clay jar, a computer beneath the sea, a map older than the continent it charts. There were spheres older than life as we know it, and concrete that still strengthens with time. Machines that may have flown, chambers that speak through sound, crystals shaped with impossible precision, nuclear reactions deep in Earth's history. We don't know who made these things. We don't know how, but we know they were made. And so we're left with two possibilities. Either our understanding of history is incomplete, or our curiosity is. One of those can be fixed. This isn't about proving aliens or rewriting textbooks overnight. It's about restoring a sense of wonder to the human timeline. About remembering that the people of the past were not primitives fumbling in the dark, but minds as capable and complex as our own, perhaps more so in ways we've yet to comprehend. We stand on the edge of their forgotten world, looking back not with certainty, but with questions. What did they know that we don't? What did they build that we've failed to preserve? And what does it say about us? That we've inherited the ruins of brilliance, yet hesitate to believe it ever existed. History isn't a straight road. It's a spiral staircase, where every step upward circles the remains of what came before. Sometimes we climb, sometimes we descend, and sometimes, just for a moment, we catch a glimpse of a light we thought we invented, flickering in the dark, lit long before we arrived. The past doesn't need to be rewritten. It needs to be reread, with eyes wide open.